Michael Blackwell thought he knew his wife, Lillian, inside and out. 9 years of marriage, shared dreams for the future, and unshakable trust. What could possibly go wrong? But when Lillian heads off to a 3-day seminar, subtle shifts in her behavior leave Michael uneasy. A chance discovery of a key and an irresistible curiosity lead him to Lillian's journals, hidden treasures that unveil a shocking double life. Her entries about a new assistant, Charles, unravel into a disturbing tale of forbidden attraction, manipulation, and devastating choices. Yet this is only the beginning. One phone call, $800, and Michael's world is turned upside down. Will these journals reveal the full truth, or will his revenge lead him into uncharted darkness? My dear friend, be sure to subscribe to my channel if this is your first time here, and give your royal like to this video. Michael Blackwell took pride in balancing his career as a skilled electrician with his role as a devoted husband. After completing his certification, he poured his energy into building a reputation as one of Glowtac's most reliable employees. Despite the demands of his job, Michael consistently made time for his wife, Lillian, with whom he shared a solid 9-year marriage. Recently, however, subtle shifts in Lillian's behavior had begun to unsettle him. A sociology professor with a talent for organization and an ambitious nature, Lillian seemed slightly different in ways he couldn't ignore. When Lillian mentioned her plans to attend professional seminars in Cincinnati, her excitement was evident. Michael offered to go with her, but she declined, emphasizing her need for independence and reminding him of their planned spring break cruise. Though her insistence gave him pause, Michael chose to trust her judgment. On Wednesday evening, after wrapping up a demanding day at work, he returned home around 6 p.m., feeling satisfied about completing a wiring job ahead of schedule. The quiet in the house was almost startling, a stark reminder that Lillian had left earlier for her 3-day seminar. Michael had considered taking leave to accompany her, but her firm assurances that they'd reconnect during their cruise stopped him. Spotting the cruise tickets prominently displayed on the sideboard, he tried to shake off his unease. However, when no text or call confirmed Lillian's arrival, he decided to reach out. She answered promptly, her cheerful voice calming his nerves. "I was just about to call you," Lillian said warmly, background chatter hinting at a lively environment. "You're always one step ahead of me." Michael chuckled. "Of course. Did you get there safely? How was the trip?" "Smooth sailing," she replied. "Your map made finding the Sheraton easy." Michael teased her. "I was tempted to take the day off and surprise you." Her response was sharper than he expected. "Michael, no. We agreed you'd stay home," she said, softening her tone a moment later. "Don't forget, we have our spring break plans." Sensing her discomfort, he reassured her. "Just kidding, Lillian. I didn't actually ask for time off. I'll behave." Relieved, she shared her itinerary and mentioned that a missing travel bag might still be at home. When Michael checked, he found it sitting on the bedroom dresser and passed on the news. "Good," Lillian said, sounding preoccupied. "I didn't want to dig through the garage for it." Before they hung up, Lillian explained that her week would be packed with presentations and social dinners, so she might not call often. They exchanged goodbyes, but Michael couldn't shake the lingering unease stirred by her strong reaction to his light-hearted joke about visiting. In the kitchen, Michael grabbed a beer and ordered a pizza, deciding to enjoy some indulgence while Lillian was away. Yet his thoughts kept circling back to her recent behavior. Over the past few months, she had oscillated between being unusually accommodating and surprisingly withdrawn. He recalled how she initially seemed open to the idea of him accompanying her, only to abruptly insist on going alone. Later that evening, as he moved Lillian's travel bag from the dresser, his eyes fell on her journal, a red leather-bound book secured with a brass lock. Lillian was intensely private about her journal, usually keeping it out of sight. Yet holding it now, Michael felt a rare and growing curiosity. Turning the book over in his hands, he noticed only a third of the pages were filled, a peculiar detail given their nearly decade-long marriage. This discovery led him to wonder if she had other journals hidden elsewhere. Driven by his curiosity, Michael searched her closet and unearthed a shoebox containing 6 more red leather journals, each labeled and identical to the one on the dresser. Noticing the name Harvests embossed on the back, he recognized the brand from a specialty store. Each journal had a matching lock, suggesting a single key might open them all. Michael decided to call the store and learned they still sold the journals and remained open late. Resolving to buy one, he hoped its key would unlock Lillian's journals without damaging them. Within an hour, he returned home with a new journal and its matching brass key. Though the $60 price tag was steep, it felt like a worthwhile investment for the answers he sought. As Michael considered the possibilities, his mind raced. Was Lillian hiding a health issue? He remembered a time when she concealed medical test results to avoid worrying him unnecessarily. Or was it work-related stress she hadn't disclosed? Whatever the reason, Michael couldn't ignore the impact her secrecy was having on their marriage. Whatever she was keeping from him, he knew it was important enough to demand his attention. Michael could not shake the gnawing doubt about Lillian's fidelity, though he fought to suppress it. Dwelling on the possibility felt unbearable, so he clung to less painful explanations. Their relationship had always been an odd pairing. Michael, with his rugged physique, sun-bleached blonde hair, and piercing blue eyes, bore the marks of his labor-intensive job, while Lillian's tall, elegant frame, framed by dark hair and soulful eyes, exuded grace and poise. They had first encountered each other during their school years, but didn't reconnect until adulthood at a gathering of mutual friends. Shortly after Lillian finished her studies, they tied the knot. Their early days were spent in a humble home, which they later upgraded, full of dreams of starting a family. When Michael returned home that night, a small part of him hesitated. He wasn't sure if the key he held could unlock the secrets hidden in Lillian's diaries. An envelope in a shoebox contained the original key, which he delicately retrieved. Briefly, he wondered if he should have asked the store clerk about interchangeable locks. If it didn't work, he resolved to abandon the effort entirely. Minutes later, Michael sat at the kitchen table with a soda in hand, and Lillian's diaries stacked before him. The small key twirled between his fingers as he contemplated the moral weight of his actions. Violating her trust felt wrong, yet his concerns for her well-being and his suspicions pushed him forward. Finally, with a deep breath, he inserted the key into the lock. It turned with ease. Michael's hands trembled as he opened the latest diary. What he read drained the color from his face. Stumbling to the sink, he crushed his soda can in his grasp until its contents spilled. Shaking off the sticky liquid, he cleaned up and moved the journals and key to the living room. There, under the soft glow of a lamp, he sat in his favorite chair, ready to face the truth. The diary entries began in June, 6 months earlier, reflecting Lillian's joy in both her personal and professional life. However, Michael couldn't help but read her words through the lens of their recent struggles, which cast a shadow over her seemingly happy recollections. Then, an entry from early September caught his eye. It marked the arrival of someone new in Lillian's life. September 8th. Today, Charles Kaufman joined my office as my new assistant. He's taller than me, with dark hair, intense eyes, and a rugged beard. He has a charm that's almost cinematic. He even left behind his academic records. Seems very competent. Michael reread the passage, his heart heavy. He pressed on, searching for more mentions of Charles. While the next few entries focused on Lillian's overwhelming workload with her large class, Charles resurfaced on September 15th. September 15th. Charles has started helping with my oversized class, assisting students while I prepare my lectures. Some of the female students are smitten, comparing him to DiCaprio. Now I realize why he seemed so familiar. Charles's presence became increasingly prominent in the entries. September 20th. Classes are running smoothly, though a few students have dropped out due to the difficulty. Charles always sits up front, watching me closely during lectures. I think I'll give him more responsibilities to keep him busy. September 24th. Charles and I spent time collaborating on reading materials for class today. We worked efficiently, copying articles and finalizing assignments. I also need to discuss starting a family with Michael. It's been on my mind a lot. As Michael read, Lillian's words alternated between her joy about their shared future and the undercurrent of tension involving Charles. October 8th. Michael and I decided to start a family, and I'm thrilled. I'll stop the pill after this semester, I told Charles, and he hugged me in my office. I had to gently push him away, reminding him the door was open. The tone darkened as the entries progressed. October 10th. Charles came into my office today and locked the door. He said no one could see us now. I demanded he open it, and he did, but the incident left me shaken. October 16th. Charles hugged me today. I didn't pull away immediately. Then he kissed me. He left without saying a word, but the moment keeps replaying in my mind. I should have stopped him sooner. Michael's anger swelled as the lines between professional and personal interactions blurred. October 20th. Charles locked the door again, claiming it was his birthday and asking for a kiss. I gave in, hoping it would end his advances, but he later admitted he lied. I should have been furious, but I wasn't. By the end of the month, Lillian's entries grew increasingly alarming. October 30th. Charles kissed me again today. This time, I didn't stop him. I told him to leave, but he just smiled and said he'd see me tomorrow. I feel torn, afraid to tell Michael, but also desperate to protect him from this. Michael's fury reached a boiling point as he pored over these confessions. Gritting his teeth, he grabbed the next diary, determined to uncover the rest of the story. The first night it all unraveled was agonizing. Each glance from him made my heart pound with fear that he'd uncover the truth. When he asked if something was wrong, I brushed it off, and he accepted my answer without suspicion. I was shocked by how easily I could conceal things from him, and prayed I'd never face such a situation again. November 6th. Charles hasn't had a private moment with me since last week. During today's lecture, I noticed him watching me. When our eyes met, he smiled, and I felt my face flush. For the first time, I'm genuinely scared of how I might react if we're alone together. November 9th. Yesterday was unbearable. Charles's actions leave me unsettled, and my own behavior terrifies me even more. I dread where this is heading. This morning, Charles entered my office so quietly I didn't hear him. Without a word, he closed the door despite my request to keep it open. When he approached and tried to lift me from my chair, I resisted, but only briefly. A kiss quickly escalated into something more. Afterward, I locked myself in the bathroom, shaken to my core. Charles followed me, unrepentant, and casually suggested we do it again. I couldn't find the strength to refuse. When Michael came home later, I managed to appear normal, even though my hands trembled. Michael noticed nothing, carrying on with his usual routine. November 12th. Last night, being with Michael felt just as comforting as ever. But afterward, I couldn't shake the nagging sensation that I was trying to convince myself of something. As he quietly read his book, oblivious to my turmoil, I felt trapped in my deceit. Charles's name vanished from my journal over the next few days. My focus shifted to classes and the chaos of the semester's end. November 17th. I don't understand what's happening to me. Charles has an influence over me that defies logic. Today, when he entered my office, I tried to confront him about what had happened. I told him it was wrong, that I loved my husband, and that this could ruin everything. He just smiled and asked whether I wanted to lock the door or if he should. Frozen in disbelief, I didn't move. He locked it himself. I feel as though we've crossed a line that can't be undone. Part of me screams to end this, but another whispers that it's not too late to step back. I can never tell Michael. At least my office is private. Even an hour later, I still feel a strange, inexplicable thrill. I need to compose myself before Michael comes home. Michael's hands trembled as he continued reading. Each page revealed more than he ever imagined. He realized how little he truly understood about Lillian. Determined, he pressed on, unable to stop even as the clock struck 2 a.m. His life, once defined by love, was now consumed by an icy void and mounting rage. After pausing to collect himself, he returned to the journals, his mind racing. It had been mere hours since he last spoke to Lillian, but suspicion had already poisoned his thoughts. November 22nd. Charles came to my office today, but I kept the desk between us. He didn't lock the door or try anything, and I think he sensed my determination. I refused to let him touch me, fueled by overwhelming guilt. I hope I can stand my ground. Michael noticed a shift in the next few entries. Charles disappeared, and Lillian's focus returned to her work and the semester's conclusion. November 23rd. I mentioned the upcoming workshops to Michael, and he was supportive, even offering to take time off to join me. I'll have to consider it. Spending more time together could be nice. But something shifted between late November and mid-December, and Michael's unease deepened as he read on. November 25th. Charles approached me in the hallway today, asking if he could visit our home. I refused, especially when he brought up Michael's night shifts. Then he suggested I come to his place instead. I declined, but he handed me his number in case I changed my mind. I told him about the seminars, and he seemed intrigued, despite them being for teachers only. November 30th. Yesterday was dreadful. I feel like I've lost myself. I barely slept, and Michael noticed my restlessness. I've been caught in daydreams about Charles, though I feel no genuine affection for him. When he came to my office today, we finished discussing exams quickly. Then he locked the door again. I couldn't stop him. Afterward, I locked myself in the bathroom and sobbed. How did this happen again? By the time I emerged, he was gone, and everything felt unnervingly normal. I spent the rest of the day crying, wondering if I should seek therapy. Michael could see Lillian's regret in her words, but it did nothing to ease his pain. Her failure to resist Charles had hardened his heart, leaving him unrecognizable to himself. December 1st. Charles stopped by today to say goodbye before leaving for the holidays. He hinted at returning early to join me at the seminar. I told him I hadn't decided yet, but he seemed excited. I don't love him, I never could, but his confidence is intoxicating. Part of me wonders if ending things on my terms would be simpler. Michael glanced at the clock, nearly 5 a.m. He took another sip of coffee, bracing himself to read on. Lillian's betrayal was laid bare, and her plans with Charles loomed on the horizon. The events of January 3rd loomed large in Lillian's mind, a trip that promised 3 days of intensive workshops and 3 nights in Charles's company. She planned to pick him up before they embarked and drop him off afterward, a seamless arrangement. Michael, fortunately, hadn't insisted on coming along, sparing her the awkwardness of an explanation. As she wandered through the mall near the Sheraton, the Victoria's Secret display caught her eye. She toyed with the idea of buying something special for Charles, a secret indulgence she could later repurpose with Michael. It felt duplicitous, but she consoled herself with the thought that Michael would never suspect. Despite the moral unease, excitement bubbled within her. Was Charles expecting something extraordinary, something outside her usual repertoire with Michael? She wasn't sure she wanted to entertain the thought. Trying anything bold might complicate things later. It might be wiser to reserve new ideas for Michael, framing them as spontaneous inspirations. As she packed, she hoped her choices wouldn't arouse suspicion. She realized, though, that this wasn't an impulsive misstep like her office indiscretion. It was a deliberate act. She still had time to cancel, to reimburse Charles for his expenses, to undo it all. Yet she knew deep down she wouldn't. Meanwhile, Michael sat in his study, the weight of discovery pressing on him. For nearly 9 hours he had been immersed in Lillian's journals. Page after page revealed a betrayal that went beyond repair. Even if she abandoned her plans with Charles, the foundation of their marriage was irreparably fractured. Forgiveness wasn't an option. As he turned each page, his affection for her crumbled, replaced by a searing hatred for Charles. The path forward crystallized. He had to take action. By noon, Michael reached for the phone, his resolve hardening. Dialing the number, he heard a professional voice on the other end. "Buford Investigations. How may I assist you?" Michael hesitated before speaking. "Do you handle cases of infidelity?" "We specialize in gathering evidence for situations like yours. Would you like to speak with a detective?" the woman asked. "Yes," Michael said, his voice firm. After a brief hold, a man introduced himself. "This is Louis Buford. I understand you're seeking proof of infidelity. How can I help?" Michael explained his predicament succinctly. "My wife is staying at the Sheraton near the airport with another man. I need photographic evidence. What will it cost?" Louis quickly outlined the process. Surveillance equipment could be discreetly installed in both rooms that same afternoon, thanks to an arrangement with the Sheraton staff. For the equipment, access fees, and footage, the cost is $800, he concluded. Michael considered alternatives. Would it be cheaper to just take photos? Lewis explained that cameras were necessary regardless to ensure comprehensive coverage. Reluctantly, Michael agreed, finalizing the payment online and providing his contact information. Lewis assured him that by the next evening, still photographs would be ready, with video footage kept on file if needed. Exhausted, Michael collapsed onto the couch and fell asleep. When he woke, he reheated leftovers and resumed reading Lillian's journals. Their phone call that evening was unremarkable, both of them carefully guarding their secrets. As he read late into the night, his thoughts strayed to what might be unfolding at the Sheraton. By morning, he had finished the journals and decided to focus on practical matters. First, he visited his workplace, Glowtech, to collect his final paycheck and empty his locker. His boss tried to persuade him to reconsider his resignation, but Michael was resolute, citing personal reasons. From there, he went to the bank, withdrawing a significant amount of cash while staying below the threshold that required Lillian's approval. Back at home, he checked his answering machine and found a message from Buford Investigations. When Michael returned the call, Louis updated him. The cameras had been installed without issue, and evidence had already been gathered. "Your suspicions were correct," Lewis said. "They spent last night together in her room. The footage is secure and I can send you stills via email." The confirmation was devastating, even after all Michael had read. It cut deeper than he expected. Fighting back tears, he instructed Lewis to send the photos but requested nothing explicit, only enough to confirm his fears. Lewis promised the images would arrive shortly. Michael ended the call and sat in silence. The weight of betrayal, though anticipated, pressed down on him. Every step forward felt heavier, yet he knew there was no turning back. Blackwell. The issue was resolved, and their business concluded. Michael uttered a low, "That's all I needed. Thank you." The detective paused briefly. "You seem different from yesterday. Is everything all right? Cases like these can be draining," he observed. Michael steadied his tone, though the tension in his voice was unmistakable. "I'll be fine. Thank you for your cooperation. Let me know if you require anything else," Louis Buford added on the line. "If you move forward with the divorce, your attorney might want the DVD copy. We'll keep it on file for a year unless instructed otherwise. And if I may, a therapist could help with the emotional weight of all this." "Don't concern yourself, Mr. Buford. I know what I have to do," Michael replied curtly before ending the call. He remained at the kitchen table, his expression unreadable, until the chime of an incoming email caught his attention. Opening the message from Buford Investigations, he printed out 3 attached photos on glossy paper. Soon, he held physical evidence of Lillian's betrayal in his hands. The images weren't graphic, just as he had requested, but they were unequivocal. After a long, contemplative glance, he slipped them into a brown envelope and set it on the table. Then he returned to the chair where he'd spent most of the past 2 days, picking up the 5th journal. By midnight, the last 2 volumes were completed. Reflecting on all 6 journals, Michael found that Lillian largely mirrored the person he thought he knew: confident, kind, and profoundly loving. There was no indication she had ever entertained the idea of infidelity before. Her entries, filled with scattered minor secrets, illuminated aspects of their shared history, from struggles with self-esteem to her battle with insecurities. One fact stood out: her deep love for him, making her recent actions with Charles all the more baffling. Michael was stunned to learn that their first meeting at a friend's birthday party hadn't been coincidental. Lillian had been thrilled to learn the host knew Michael and had specifically asked for him to be invited. So absorbed was he in the journals that he hadn't noticed the absence of any call from Lillian. Only the rumble of his stomach interrupted his reading, prompting him to prepare a quick sandwich. As he ate, dark thoughts of Lillian and Charles swirled in his mind, strengthening his resolve for what he needed to do next. Perhaps it was the late-night meal or his racing thoughts, but Michael struggled to sleep. By 7 a.m., he gave up and started his day early. At 8:30, he made a rare call to his brother Nicholas, the only close family he had left. Though they weren't estranged, their interactions were mostly limited to holiday gatherings. Nicholas sounded surprised by the call, but assured him that the family's day was free. Michael arrived at his brother's house shortly after 10 a.m. Calling Nicholas's children into the kitchen, while his sister-in-law, Ellie, prepared coffee, he handed each child a $100 bill for their upcoming Disneyland trip. The kids' excitement was infectious as they hugged him in thanks, though Nicholas looked intrigued. "You didn't have to do that," Nicholas said. "What's this about? Did you come into some money?" Michael managed a faint smile. "No windfalls. Just wanted to do something nice." They made small talk over coffee until Ellie brought up his and Lillian's plans for a family. "Lillian mentioned you two were considering kids soon. You'd make wonderful parents," she said warmly. Michael hesitated briefly before replying. "So she told you about that? Women do share everything." Before Ellie could respond, he added, "Well, plans like that can change. Life gets in the way sometimes." He then steered the conversation toward Nicholas's job at the restaurant. Not long after, Michael rose to leave. "If I don't see you before Christmas, I hope everything works out for you," he said, shaking Nicholas's hand and giving Ellie a quick hug. "You're all in my thoughts." As Michael drove away, Nicholas turned to Ellie. "What do you think that was about?" He seemed preoccupied, like he had something big on his mind. Ellie shrugged. "Probably just killing time until Lillian gets back from her conference. Didn't she say she'd be home tonight?" They went back inside and resumed their day. Lillian returned home just before 6 p.m. to find Michael's car absent. The quiet house unsettled her. She had hoped to see him right away. Still, the solitude gave her a chance to unpack and catch up on chores. She also planned to shower again, still uneasy about whether the morning's effort had erased all traces of Charles. Passing through the kitchen, she noticed a note pinned under the salt shaker. "Lillian, Andrew called this morning needing help at the village center. I agreed to step in as senior foreman. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. Michael." Though irritated, she welcomed the extra time alone. Carrying the note upstairs with her luggage, she opted for a long bath instead of a shower and began sorting laundry. As she moved the basket, her eyes caught sight of her journal atop the tall dresser. Relieved it appeared untouched, she retrieved it. She'd intended to update it during her trip, but hadn't gotten the chance. While the washing machine hummed, Lillian prepared a simple meal of soup and a sandwich. Afterward, she tried calling Michael, only to hear his ringtone buzzing from a basket on the counter. "Wonderful," she muttered. "Now I can't even contact you." Returning to the table with her journal, she unlocked it with a small brass key from her wallet and began writing. January 7th. The most intense 4 days of my life are behind me, and I need to document everything. Some of this will be painful to put down, but it's necessary. She recounted picking up Charles, his enthusiasm for the trip, and his constant need to touch her during the drive. Though she'd initially been annoyed, her irritation eventually gave way to enjoyment once they hit the open road. She detailed their stops, including an awkward visit to Victoria's Secret, where his crude comments made her uncomfortable. As she wrote, her emotions spilled out, satisfaction mingled with guilt, regret shadowed by moments of pleasure. Writing brought clarity. For the first time, Lillian understood how physical intimacy differed from love. That painful realization had struck her most during their first night together. By Friday morning, Lillian made it unmistakably clear to Charles that she no longer wanted him visiting her room, conveying this through the firm boundary of a locked door. Later that day, a wave of relief washed over her when she saw him with another woman, a sight that assured her she wouldn't have to deal with him that night. Her thoughts instead drifted toward Michael and the fragile hope of repairing their fractured marriage. Finishing her journal entry, she used her pen as a placeholder and left the journal on the table before heading upstairs to draw a bath. Carrying a cordless phone with her, she prepared herself for the possibility of a call from Michael. Once the tub was ready, Lillian infused the water with fragrant oils, lit a few candles for a calming atmosphere, and eased herself into the warm embrace of the bath. Fatigue tugged at her, and she nearly succumbed to sleep when an unsettling sensation snapped her awake, a sharp awareness of being observed. Her eyes darted toward the partially open bedroom door, but the room beyond appeared empty. Dismissing the eerie feeling, she tried to refocus on her hopes for reconciliation. An hour later, refreshed, she went to the kitchen to move her clothes to the dryer. As she returned to her journal to revisit her thoughts, she noticed her pen wasn't where she had left it. After a brief search, she found it on the counter near a wicker basket. Puzzled but dismissing the oddity, she settled back into her reading. By Sunday morning, she felt determined to start afresh. The day began with a whirlwind of cleaning, followed by a shower and an outfit she knew Michael favored. By noon, she sat in the kitchen, enveloped in the aroma of coffee and a roasting beef. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find two men. One, a younger officer in uniform, his hand resting on his holstered weapon, and the other, an older man in a suit who presented a badge. "Detective Conway," he introduced himself, gesturing to his companion. "And this is Officer Gallagher. We're with the Springfield Police Department. Is Michael Blackwell at home?" Surprised but calmed by their professional demeanor, Lillian responded, "Michael's at work. Is there a problem? I'm his wife. Maybe I can help." The men exchanged a glance before Conway asked, "Would you mind if we came inside? It's a bit chilly out here." "Of course," she said, stepping aside. Leading them into the kitchen, she asked, "Why are you looking for Michael? He's never been in trouble before." Conway's expression darkened. "We're investigating a homicide, and the call reporting it was traced to your husband's phone." Confusion and disbelief surged through her. "That has to be a mistake," she said. "Michael's phone was here last night. I found it in that basket when I tried calling him." She gestured to the wicker basket on the counter. Conway walked over to inspect the basket, but came back empty-handed. "There's no phone here now. Are you sure about this?" Panic flared in her chest as she scanned the counter and saw nothing. "I'm positive. It was here last night," she stammered, her voice unsteady. Conway pressed gently. "If the phone isn't here, the call we traced may not have been a mistake. Let me ask, does your husband know Charles Kaufman?" The mention of Charles froze Lillian, shock evident on her face. "I know Charles," she admitted cautiously, "but Michael doesn't. Charles was my teaching assistant last semester." The detectives exchanged another look. "So there's no reason for your husband to have a conflict with him?" Conway asked. "No," she insisted, though her voice quivered with unease. "Michael's never met him." Conway leaned forward. "Then how do you explain your husband being the one to report Mr. Kaufman's murder?" The words struck her like a blow. "Charles is dead?" she whispered, collapsing into a chair. "He was with me yesterday. I dropped him off at his house around 5:30. How could he be dead?" "What was your relationship with Mr. Kaufman?" Conway asked. "Could it have created a motive for your husband?" "Charles was just a student and assistant," Lillian replied, though her voice wavered. "Michael wouldn't hurt him." The silence in the room was deafening until Conway spoke again. "At the scene, we found signs of a struggle and evidence of an attack. The estimated time of death was between 6 and 8 p.m. A travel bag was left behind, along with 3 photographs we believe were shown to him before his death." He slid copies of the photos toward her. Picking them up, Lillian gasped audibly, recognizing the images. "No, Michael couldn't have known about these," she muttered, her voice breaking as she buried her face in her hands. Conway's phone buzzed, interrupting the moment. After a brief conversation, he turned back to her. "We've tracked your husband's phone to Niagara Falls, Ontario. Local police found it, along with his credit cards, a .25 caliber pistol, and his car's license plates discarded in a Walmart trash bin. It seems he replaced his plates with stolen ones." As Lillian's sobs intensified, Conway placed another photo on the table, showing a brass key beside a ruler. "Do you recognize this?" She pulled a similar key from her wallet, her hand trembling. "It's the key to my journal," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Michael must have—" Her words dissolved into uncontrollable sobbing. The officer stayed until Lillian's sister arrived to support her. As they returned to their car, Gallagher asked, "Think we'll catch him soon?" "It depends on how well he stays under the radar," Conway replied. "He's not a serial killer. If he avoids attention, he might disappear." Gallagher frowned. "And the phone being at the house? Do you think she's lying?" "No, I think she's truthful," Conway said thoughtfully. He likely came back for the phone and intended to confront her, but decided against it. Whatever stopped him, we may never know. When she figures it out, though, I wonder how she'll cope with it. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Ethan and Chloe sat in a quiet, dimly lit restaurant, the flickering light of a single candle casting shadows on their faces. The intimate setting should have been perfect for celebrating 6 years of marriage, yet something in the air felt wrong. The warmth that once flowed between them had been replaced by an uneasy silence. Chloe's eyes lingered on Ethan, her fingers absently swirling her glass of wine. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice barely above a murmur. "Ethan," she began, her words tentative, "do you still love me?" A smile tugged at Ethan's lips, though her tone struck him as strange. "Of course, Chloe, why wouldn't I?" he replied, though a sense of unease crept into his voice. Chloe met his gaze, her face unreadable as she leaned in slightly. "If you really love me," she said slowly, "would you let me be with other men?" Ethan's smile faltered, his heart suddenly racing as he processed her words. A nervous laugh escaped him, masking the confusion he felt. "What are you talking about? Are you out of your mind?" She shrugged, as if discussing something as inconsequential as a change of plans. "I'm serious, Ethan. I feel like I need this. I want to explore who I am, to understand myself better." Ethan blinked, still trying to make sense of her statement. "Understand yourself better?" His voice was incredulous. "What about us? We've been together for 6 years. Aren't we happy?" Chloe exhaled softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass. "We are. But don't you think there's more to life than this? I feel like there's something missing, something I've never had the chance to experience." Ethan shook his head, disbelief written across his face. "Chloe, this sounds like an excuse to sleep with other men. Is that really what you want?" "It's not just about that," Chloe replied, her tone defensive but calm. "I need to figure out who I am before we talk about starting a family, for example." Ethan's brow furrowed, though a note of concern softened his expression. "Chloe, maybe instead of chasing after these ideas, we should be focusing on having kids. Isn't that what we should be doing now? It's time, don't you think?" Chloe let out a bitter laugh, dismissing his suggestion with a wave of her hand. "Children are great, Ethan, but I can't bring a child into this world without first knowing who I really am. I've never even been with anyone else." Ethan leaned forward, his voice tinged with frustration. "So, you need to be with other men to find yourself before we can have kids together?" Chloe's lips curved into a slight smirk, her tone almost teasing. "Maybe." She took another sip of her wine, her eyes locked on his. After a beat, she tilted her head and asked, "Ethan, have you ever cheated on me? Even once? A fling, anything small?" Ethan stared at her, stunned. "Cheat on you?" he echoed, his voice turning icy. "Chloe, I've never even thought about it, let alone done it. Have I ever given you any reason to doubt me?" Chloe leaned in, a playful glint in her eye as she traced her finger over the tablecloth. "Oh, come on. I've read all about how men are biologically wired for polygamy. It's in your nature, right? Men cheat more often because of their instincts." Ethan's jaw tightened, the hint of anger creeping into his tone. "That's just an excuse people use to justify bad behavior," he said firmly. "Loyalty is a choice, Chloe. It's about integrity." She laughed softly, resting her chin on her hand. "All right then, Mr. Integrity. How many women have you been with before me?" Ethan flushed but met her gaze. "I've told you before. Just one. We thought it was serious, but it didn't work out. And then I met you, and here we are, 6 years later." Chloe raised an eyebrow, a teasing smile tugging at her lips. "Just one? Really? Ethan, you don't have to be shy with me. It's fine if there were more." "I'm being honest," he replied, his voice steady but firm. She waved dismissively, as if his answer didn't quite satisfy her. You're too modest. I think you're just embarrassed to admit there were others. Before Ethan could respond, Chloe leaned in again, her voice soft but insistent. Ethan, I want to try this. Just for a little while. An open marriage. I think it could help me figure things out. Maybe you even want the same thing, but you're too afraid to admit it. The warmth Ethan had felt at the beginning of the evening seemed to evaporate, replaced by a deep sense of betrayal. Chloe, he said, his voice strained. Even suggesting this means something's already broken. Don't you see that? Chloe raised her hand, a pleading look in her eyes. No, Ethan, wait. Listen to me. There are people who say an open marriage can actually make a relationship stronger. It gives both people the freedom they need to appreciate what they have. Ethan exhaled sharply, his eyes scanning her face as he struggled to understand. This is crazy, he said, his voice rising in frustration. How could you think this would help us? Chloe's playful demeanor shifted into something sharper, irritation flashing in her gaze. See? You're not even trying to understand me. You act like you care about how I feel, but you're not listening. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, trying to stay calm. Chloe, I am listening. But how can you not see how absurd this sounds? Our marriage, our life together, it's built on trust and loyalty. She scoffed, shaking her head. A real husband, a supportive husband, would try to understand his wife, even when her ideas are unconventional. But you shut me down as soon as I say something uncomfortable. Chloe, come on, Ethan said, his frustration finally boiling over. How is any of this supposed to help? It's not normal. Her eyes locked with his, defiance mixed with hurt, and in that moment, the distance between them, once so subtle, felt as vast as an ocean. That's exactly the issue, Ethan, Chloe snapped, her voice filled with sharp frustration. We're shackled by these old, restrictive conventions. These limitations are set by people too afraid to take risks, too afraid to venture outside their comfort zones. They're for the weak, those who fear everything, who lock themselves into rigid boxes and expect the rest of the world to follow suit. Her tone grew fiercer, and she leaned in closer, her words cutting through the air. Even in the Middle Ages, Ethan, aristocrats had wives they cared for, but they also had lovers, mistresses, and no one batted an eye. It was just accepted. Ethan exhaled slowly, trying to steady his voice. I don't think it's the same thing, Chloe. No, it's not, she answered softly, but her resolve was clear. All I'm asking for is a chance for us to explore, to evolve. If you really love me, Ethan, let me experience other relationships. Don't be so selfish. At that very moment, a waiter passed by, and Chloe's words lingered in the air, sharp and heavy. The young man stumbled, nearly dropping his tray, clearly startled as he hurried off. Ethan felt his face burn with embarrassment, and he could sense the eyes of others turning toward them. The restaurant seemed suddenly quieter, as if the tension had thickened in the room. He leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper. Chloe, please, let's keep this private. She didn't respond immediately, her arms crossing tightly over her chest, her expression hard with determination. Feeling the weight of the situation pressing on him, Ethan reached for the check. Let's go home. We can talk about this there. Without waiting for her reply, he signaled for the waiter, and they sat in silence as the bill was brought to their table, the waiter's face betraying no emotion. The drive back was heavy with silence, thick and suffocating. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Chloe, on the other hand, stared out the window, her arms tightly crossed. The night, which had begun with so much promise, had turned sour, and each of them was lost in their own spiral of thoughts, heading in different directions. As soon as they stepped inside the house, Chloe broke the silence, her voice cold with frustration. I honestly thought that being up front with you would be the right thing to do. I wanted us to be open, no secrets. But clearly, Ethan, you don't care about what I feel. Ethan tossed his keys onto the table and turned to face her, the anger in his voice palpable. Care? Chloe, this is insane. An open marriage? That's just cheating, plain and simple. There's nothing honest about it, he continued, disbelief thick in his tone. It's wrong, Chloe. Chloe sighed heavily, shaking her head as she looked at him. Maybe Eric was right about you. Eric? Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. She knows about this? Chloe met his gaze with unwavering defiance. Yes, I talked to her about it. And she knew immediately you'd oppose it, Chloe added, her voice almost bitter. She warned me, actually. Ethan let out a derisive laugh, a mix of sarcasm and resentment. Of course she did. Eric, the expert on relationships. Oh, right, he continued, his voice mocking. The woman who's never been in a real relationship, she's the one to teach me about open marriages. Chloe shot him a withering look. Eric gets it. She understands that these outdated, rigid rules don't work for everyone. Open marriages, Ethan, they're progressive. They free up your sexual and creative energy. It's about living a more liberated life. Ethan stared at her, his disbelief deepening with each passing second. So Eric is the one filling your head with this nonsense? She's convincing you that betraying your partner is some kind of spiritual awakening? Chloe's posture stiffened, her tone now sharp and defensive. No, she didn't plant any ideas in my head. This is something I came to on my own. And unlike you, she added, Eric is actually supportive. She knows what it means to be a real friend. Ethan's patience snapped. A real friend? Chloe, Eric's out of her mind half the time. Do you honestly want advice from her? Chloe's eyes narrowed, her voice turning cold and low. Don't you dare talk about her like that. I've known Eric longer than I've known you. She's never judged me, never made me feel small. She's always had my back, especially when things were tough. Ethan's anger faltered for a moment, replaced by a deep vulnerability. He exhaled sharply, his voice tense but controlled. Does her opinion matter more than mine, Chloe? I'm your husband. Does that mean nothing anymore? Chloe's face hardened, her voice low and icy. Don't try to manipulate me, Ethan. Don't turn this into some stupid ultimatum between you and my best friend. Ethan's frustration boiled over. He slammed his fist onto the table, the sound of it echoing through the room, his voice booming with fury. Chloe, I can't take this anymore. You want to make me a joke? A cuckold? I've told you how I feel, and yet you keep pushing this. His anger surged again, making his words sharp and bitter. If this is the life you want, then fine, but don't expect me to accept it. And let Eric deal with her own mess instead of feeding you these crazy ideas. Chloe's eyes widened, and her voice faltered, trembling with fear. Ethan, don't yell at me. You're scaring me. She took a step back, her face crumpling as she spoke. You slammed your fist on the table. What's next? Are you going to hit me? Her words were barely above a whisper, and the accusation in her eyes cut deep into Ethan's chest. He froze, a wave of guilt crashing over him. What are you talking about, Chloe? I would never hit you. But I won't lie. This conversation is driving me insane. Chloe shook with sobs, her body trembling as she covered her face with her hands. She turned away, her tears hidden behind her palms, and walked quickly to the bedroom, disappearing behind the door. Lex's heart raced as he heard the soft rustle of drawers being pulled open, followed by the hurried sound of items being tossed into a bag. A cold rush of anxiety swept through him, and he instinctively moved toward the door. Chloe, what are you doing? His voice was tight with concern. She appeared in the doorway a moment later, her purse slung over her shoulder and a few belongings carelessly packed into a bag. Her eyes were red, swollen, her face a study of pain and quiet disappointment. I'm scared of you, Ethan, she whispered, her gaze fixed anywhere but on him. I can't stay here tonight. I need some space to think about everything. About us. Ethan stood frozen, the heaviness of her words sinking in. Are you leaving? He asked, his voice barely a murmur. Chloe didn't respond immediately. She adjusted the strap of her purse, her fingers moving with an almost automatic precision, like she was performing a task she no longer had to think about. I'm not leaving, Ethan. I just need time alone, she said, her tone softening just a little. She met his eyes briefly, a silent pain in her gaze. I love you, but I didn't expect this from you. You scared me. A knot tightened in Ethan's chest. Where are you going at this hour? His frustration gave way to genuine concern now, the knot of anxiety in his stomach twisting. Don't worry about me, she replied, her voice distant as she wiped a tear from her cheek. I'll stay with Eric, or maybe get a room. I need to be alone. The door clicked shut behind her with finality, and Ethan was left standing in the emptiness, the silence pressing in on him like a heavy weight. He sank into a chair at the kitchen table, gripping the edge as if it could anchor him. Guilt gnawed at him, but the other thoughts wouldn't leave him alone. Had he overreacted? Should he have been more patient, more understanding? But then, a darker thought crept in, persistent and unwelcome. Was Chloe really that upset? Or was she playing some kind of game, manipulating him, turning the tables? He couldn't let go of the question, and the longer he wrestled with it, the more his mind raced, the tighter the pressure behind his eyes became. A headache bloomed at his temples. The day dragged on, the fog of his unresolved emotions clouding his thoughts. At work, Ethan felt drained, as though his mind had become a prisoner to the events of the previous night. The thought of returning to an empty house filled him with unease. He needed to clear his head. After work, he decided to take a walk, hoping the quiet of the nearby park would offer some respite from the storm inside him. He found an empty bench by the pond, where the only sound was the soft quacking of ducks gliding along the water. The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting a warm, golden hue over the grass. Ethan inhaled deeply, and for a moment, the tension in his body began to ease. As he sat there, trying to still his mind, an elderly man slowly approached, shuffling along the path. He paused in front of Ethan's bench and gave him a smile, the kind that seemed both gentle and knowing, as if he had lived a lifetime of stories. "Mind if I sit for a moment?" the old man asked, his voice warm and inviting. "I come here every day to enjoy this view." Ethan nodded, grateful for the distraction. "Please sit down." The man settled onto the bench beside him, gazing out over the pond with a quiet contentment. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the storm of thoughts swirling in Ethan's mind. After a few minutes, Ethan couldn't help himself. He needed to ask. "How do you stay so calm?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of wonder. "You seem so peaceful." The old man chuckled softly, the sound rich and full. "Well," he said, "when I was younger I had my share of troubles, but now they seem so small. Life's complicated, but that's what makes it beautiful. I've learned to take things as they come, trust me. Worrying doesn't help." Ethan sat quietly, letting the man's words wash over him. They felt as though they came from a place far removed from the turmoil he was feeling. "You speak so wisely," Ethan said, still struggling to grasp the full meaning of the man's perspective. "I don't think I'm quite there yet." The old man smiled, his eyes twinkling as he turned to face Ethan more fully. "All right then, let me give you some advice." His voice dropped a little, becoming more serious. "Don't fall in love with money. It will deceive you. Don't fall in love with women. They will deceive you too." Ethan blinked in surprise, taken aback by the bluntness of the words. But the old man wasn't finished. "Of all the things that can intoxicate you, freedom is the most powerful," he continued, locking eyes with Ethan. "And remember this, only a fool is certain. The wise man doubts everything." The man's gaze softened again as he turned his attention back to the pond, the tranquility in his eyes seemingly unaffected by the weight of his words. Ethan sat there, stunned, feeling the gravity of what he had just heard settle over him. It was as though a fog had descended, heavy and dense, and he wasn't sure whether it was clearing or growing thicker. After a long moment, Ethan stood, feeling an unfamiliar sense of closure slowly settling within him. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice sincere. "I'm going to head out now. Have a good evening." The old man gave a small wave, and Ethan turned to leave, his mind turning over the advice he had just received. The doubts about Chloe, still fresh and unresolved, began to bubble up again. Was she truly sincere, or was this just another part of some game she was playing? The words about deception and freedom echoed in his mind, becoming louder with each step he took toward his car. When Ethan returned home, the house felt empty, like a hollow shell. He knew what he had to do. Taking a deep breath, he pulled out his phone and dialed Chloe's number. After several rings, she picked up, her voice soft and weary. "Chloe," Ethan began, his voice gentle. "I'm sorry for how I acted last night. I shouldn't have been so harsh with you." There was a pause on the other end, and then Chloe's voice responded, just as soft. "I appreciate that, Ethan, and I shouldn't have thrown the idea of an open marriage at you like I did. I don't know what I was thinking. It wasn't fair to you." A flicker of hope sparked in Ethan's chest. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "I know things have been difficult. Maybe we can work through this." Chloe's voice softened, and there was a note of uncertainty in it. "I think I need to sort through some things on my own first. I've been under more stress than I realized. I've even set up a few sessions with a therapist to help me get my head straight." Ethan nodded, relief washing over him. "That sounds like a good idea. We both need some time to think." "I'm also planning to take some time off work," Chloe added, her voice sounding a little lighter. A cautious optimism filled Ethan's chest. "Take care of yourself," he said. "We'll talk soon." As he hung up, a small weight lifted from his shoulders. The future still seemed uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel afraid of it. The tension between them had been building for some time, and Ethan felt its weight press down on him like a heavy cloak. A little distance, he thought, might be the exact thing he needed to clear his mind. "Maybe some time apart is what we both need," he said, his voice attempting to relieve the knot tightening in his chest. Chloe agreed, mentioning that she would stay with Eric for a few more days before heading to her parents' farm to check on things. "I love you," Chloe said, her voice soft yet full of emotion. "I want to save our marriage, but I think taking a step back would be good for us. Time apart will give us both space to reset, to miss each other and come back stronger." The relief Ethan felt from her words was immediate, almost physical. "I love you too, Chloe," he replied, a flicker of optimism beginning to stir inside him. After their goodbyes, he hung up the phone, and for the first time in days, he felt a lightness in his chest. The pressure that had weighed on him seemed to lift, and for the next 20 minutes, he allowed himself to believe that this separation could actually be the beginning of something better. But then, without warning, the old man's words returned to him, spoiling his brief moment of peace. Ethan walked into the kitchen and pulled a notepad from a drawer. He sat down at the table and began writing down the words that had been repeating in his mind since he first heard them. "Don't fall in love with money, it will deceive you. Don't fall in love with women, they will deceive you. The most intoxicating wine is freedom. A fool is certain of everything." His pen hovered over the next line. "The wise man doubts everything." Simple yet profound, the words seemed to echo in his mind. His eyes lingered on one phrase in particular: "Don't fall in love with women, they will deceive you." What if Chloe wasn't telling him everything? What if this talk of needing space was just a way for her to distance herself, to pull away from him emotionally? He wondered if her sudden desire for independence, spending time with Eric, being alone at the farm, was more than just an effort to clear her mind. Maybe it was a cover for something else, something she wouldn't do while living under his roof. His eyes drifted back to the page where the next line read, "A fool is certain of everything. The wise man doubts everything." Suddenly it hit him hard, his growing doubts about Chloe's intentions. Despite all her reassurances, something felt wrong. He couldn't shake the suspicion that this break wasn't just a time for her to recharge. It was becoming more and more like an excuse for something deeper. The idea that she might be hiding something began to form like a dark shadow in his mind. What if he could find out the truth? What if he hired a private investigator? If Chloe was truly working on herself, then he'd have peace of mind. But if there was something more going on, he would know. The decision felt both necessary and deeply unsettling. The next morning, Ethan wasted no time. He found a private investigator, a seasoned professional in his late 50s named Jason. Ethan explained everything: his suspicions, his doubts, and his fear that something was wrong with Chloe. Jason listened intently, nodding as though he had heard this kind of story countless times before. "You're doing the right thing," Jason said, his voice steady and reassuring. "I'll keep an eye on her, give you regular updates. By the time she's back, you'll have the answers you need." Ethan felt a strange mixture of relief and guilt. He hadn't wanted to go down this path, but something told him that the truth, whatever it might be, was the only way forward. He would face it, even if it was painful. The following weeks blurred by. He and Chloe still spoke regularly, and to Ethan's surprise, their conversations were pleasant, even upbeat. Chloe seemed to be making progress, talking about the things she had been working through. She even admitted that some of her earlier ideas had been foolish. She sounded more like the woman Ethan had fallen in love with, and for a brief time, he allowed hope to creep back into his heart. Then one evening, Chloe called. "Ethan," she said warmly, "I've missed you. I think I should come home. We can leave all of this behind us and start fresh, don't you think?" Ethan felt a surge of joy. "Yes, Chloe, I'd love that. Come home. We can start over." They agreed on a date for her return. The days leading up to her return were filled with anticipation. When the night arrived, Ethan prepared their favorite meal, set the table with candles casting a soft glow, and uncorked a bottle of wine they both loved. When the doorbell rang, he was ready. He opened the door to find Chloe standing there, her face radiant with a smile. She stepped into his arms, and in that moment, all the doubts that had been gnawing at him seemed to vanish. She felt familiar, real, and Ethan allowed himself to believe that everything would be okay. They sat down together, clinking glasses as the warm glow of the candles danced around them. Laughter filled the room as they shared the meal. For a while, it felt like nothing had changed. But as the evening began to wind down, Ethan knew there was a conversation that had to happen, the conversation they had both been avoiding. "Chloe," he began carefully, "I can see the change in you. I can feel it. You're in a better place, and I'm glad." She smiled, her hand reaching across the table to his. "Yes, Ethan," she said softly. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us, about myself. It feels good to be here, to start fresh." For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to relax into her words, trusting her sincerity. But then Chloe paused, her eyes sparkling with a playful glint. "Ethan," she said, leaning in slightly, "I've been thinking. You were right about us needing children, and I think we should start working on that, right after dinner." Ethan smiled, warmth spreading through him. "Well, my dear," he said, "in honor of this evening, I actually have a little something for you. A gift, maybe two." Chloe's face lit up with excitement. "Oh, Ethan, you're incredible," she exclaimed, eagerly tearing off the wrapping. She opened the box with a grin, but as she looked inside, her smile faltered. There were two plain folders. Confusion crossed her face. "What's this?" she asked, her voice tinged with unease. "What is this, Ethan?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze calm but unwavering. "Go ahead, Chloe," he said softly. "Open them. Read." Chloe slowly picked up the first folder and opened it. As her eyes scanned the contents, her face drained of color. Divorce papers. Shock flashed across her face, followed by a look of panic. She looked up at him, her mouth opening, but words failed her. Ethan didn't flinch. He sat there, waiting, letting her process the truth. Her hands trembled slightly as she stole a glance at him, her face draining of color. "What? What is this, Ethan?" she stammered, her voice unsteady. "Keep reading," he responded, his tone flat, betraying no emotion. With obvious hesitation, she reached for the second folder. As she flipped through the pages, her expression collapsed. There, spread out before her, were the damning images. Her smiling with Eric at a nightclub, her arms wrapped around a stranger, followed by more photographs of her with different men, caught in intimate moments at a hotel. As she turned page after page, the images became more incriminating, and her face paled further with each new revelation. Included in the file were also documents from a recent hospital visit, detailing a gynecological exam conducted only days before her return. Ethan watched her closely, his face unreadable. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide in shock. She lifted her gaze to him, horror written all over her face. "Chloe," he said softly, his voice devoid of warmth. "You've been lying to me. You spent days out partying with Eric, seeing other men, all the while I was here thinking you were finding yourself." He shook his head slowly. "You told me you were visiting your parents, but you were only there for 2 days." Her lips trembled, and she began to shake her head, trying to protest. "Ethan, please. This is all a misunderstanding. Someone is framing me. This isn't real. I swear it's all fake." Ethan's gaze hardened, and he let out a short, bitter laugh. "You know, Chloe," he said, his voice icy as he leaned in slightly, "there's one thing I can't seem to understand. Why did you seem to loathe all that freedom you had?" He paused, as if a thought had just struck him. "Or wait." He raised an eyebrow, as if the answer was dawning on him. "Maybe I get it now. It's because those men you were with didn't want commitment. They didn't want stability. They didn't even want you. They just wanted one thing. A few wild nights, and that was all." With trembling hands, Chloe reached for the second folder once more. Her fingers shook as she leafed through more photographs. There she was again, laughing with Eric, her arms around some stranger, then with another man, caught in even more private, compromising moments. As she continued, her face grew more drawn, her complexion ghostly pale, especially when she found an image of herself buying a pregnancy test, followed by another from the hospital showing her during the gynecological exam. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on her, his expression unwavering. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth once more, and she stared at him, her face contorted in disbelief. "Chloe," he repeated, his voice low and steady, "you've been lying to me. While I believed you were finding yourself, you were out there with other men. You lied about your time with your parents, too." Tears welled up in Chloe's eyes as she clutched the folder to her chest, her voice breaking. "Ethan, please, it's all a setup. Someone is framing me. It's not real." Ethan's eyes grew colder still, and he let out another dry laugh. "Chloe," he said, his voice full of disdain, "I just don't get it. Why did you act like you wanted freedom? Or maybe you didn't want freedom at all. Maybe what you really wanted was attention from men who didn't care about anything but a few carefree nights with you. And that's exactly what you got." Chloe's tears flowed freely now, her sobs uncontrollable. She clutched the folder tightly, as if it could somehow make things right. "Ethan, please. You're my husband. This isn't what it looks like. Please believe me." But Ethan stood up, his movements sharp and decisive. He gathered his keys from the table, his face cold and emotionless. "I've seen enough," he said, the faintest trace of a humorless smile tugging at his lips. "Enjoy your freedom, Chloe," he added, his words dripping with ice. "I'll see you in court." Without a second glance, he turned and walked out the door, leaving her sobbing behind him. As Ethan drove away, an unexpected sense of relief began to wash over him. The burden of suspicion and doubt that had weighed on him for months was finally lifting. He headed to a quiet motel, seeking solitude to clear his mind. The weeks dragged on as the divorce proceedings unfolded, each session unearthing more of Chloe's lies. She maintained that the evidence, the photos, the videos, was all part of a cruel plot to destroy her. But the truth was undeniable. The photos were real. The lies had unraveled, and no amount of denial could change the facts. In the end, the judge ruled in Ethan's favor, finalizing the divorce. Chloe left the courtroom looking hollow, her once vibrant spirit now diminished. Eric, however, stood by her side, defiantly offering her bitter support. "Who cares about him, Chloe?" she spat. "To hell with your paranoid ex. You deserve so much better." Eric's voice rang through the hallway, reaching Ethan's ears as he walked toward the exit. She turned to him, her eyes flashing with contempt. "Weakling, paranoid. Aren't you ashamed of yourself for what you've done to Chloe? Just another smug little man." For a moment, Ethan considered responding, but the words seemed futile. Instead, he simply met her gaze, shrugged, and said quietly, "I wish you both happiness and good luck." Without another word, he walked out of the building, the cool autumn air filling his lungs. As he stepped onto the quiet street, A profound sense of finality settled over him. It was over. In the weeks that followed, Ethan found himself returning to the park, again and again, searching for the elderly man who had once shared such wisdom with him by the pond. He checked the same bench, hoping to see the man seated there, gazing across the water. But each time, the bench was empty. Ethan asked other park-goers, describing the man, but no one seemed to recognize him. One afternoon, Ethan sat on that old wooden bench, staring at the still surface of the pond. His thoughts drifted. He wondered if the man had ever existed at all. Perhaps he had been a messenger, a symbol of clarity who appeared at the right moment, offering insight just when Ethan needed it most. Or maybe the man had been a figment of his imagination, an embodiment of wisdom brought to life in his moment of need. Whatever the truth, Ethan felt a deep, abiding peace. The doubts had melted away. His heart was calm, and for the first time in a long while, he saw things clearly. With a soft smile, he stood up, leaving the park behind, the weight of the past finally lifted from his shoulders. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the Force be with you.